In this video, we're going to talk about disaster planning. Disasters can come in a variety of flavors. We look at this year with the pandemic, and that was a disaster for a lot of businesses, and not one that any of us expected. Even though the disaster was not something that most people would have planned for in their business planning, I can say this, that I'm confident businesses that had a disaster plan coped better with the pandemic than those that didn't have a plan. I'm going to share the story of an unexpected disaster and the impact of not having a disaster plan had on a company and its customers. And I was one of those customers. And again, this wasn't something that the company expected. It was truly something unexpected. My internet, which is the lifeblood of my business, is provided through a reseller for AT&T. I'm on a prepaid plan, and it gets updated every month. And I had really loved the service. My bandwidth's good. Everything was good about it until this problem occurred. On December 31st, AT&T had a server that failed. And that server was responsible for billing the prepaid cards. And because it didn't issue the bills and get payment, at that point in time, AT&T started shutting off service to everybody that was on those plans. It wasn't just my cellular carrier that got affected, but it was cellular carriers around the United States. Literally thousands or tens of thousands of companies lost their internet. And as I said, it wasn't something they had a plan for. It wasn't something they expected. By January 2nd, which was a Saturday, they were so overwhelmed with customer complaints and customers calling in trying to get status that they weren't able to answer the phone or respond to emails. They had staff in the office, and after about 15 tries, I finally got through to somebody to try to come up with a plan B. But I was fortunate. Most people couldn't even get through to them. To make matters worse, their contact at AT&T were off for the long weekend. So it was Monday before anybody at AT&T came to work and could start working on the problem. It was Tuesday when they were able to start to identify what the issue was and start to get it resolved. But for myself, I didn't get AT&T service back till Thursday. So for my business, I was out of internet on AT&T from Monday to Thursday, which was devastating to what I try to do and training and the things that I needed the internet for. We're going to look at the area where this company failed, and then we're going to discuss these in regards to your company and how you can build a disaster plan that takes care of all the things that need to be included. I'm going to discuss the areas that I see as being critical. And as you go through your process, you may find that other areas have higher priority than the things that I list. I'm going to give you my list of priorities and the reasons for those. We're going to start and we'll talk about communication first. And I will say that from my perspective as a customer, their communication strategy was abysmal. They were not proactive at all, and their reactive response was horrid. It was impossible to get any update for the first few days. And then they thought that they could just make blog posts and post something in a Facebook group that I didn't know anything about, and that would be a good communication strategy. And I'll say it's better than nothing. But the challenge is there was nothing on the homepage of their website to A, identify there was a problem, and B, tell you where to look for answers. You look at their website, it looked like everything was up and running and normal. They were so overwhelmed that they weren't responding to voicemails or emails, because I put in several of both and never got a response. So we'll go to thinking about your business now. I want you to think about whatever the worst case scenario you can imagine for your business is, and then think about how would you start to reach out to your customers. Think about the impact on your customers if your building burned to the ground or was destroyed in some other manner, and you lost all of the computers and records that were inside the building. So all of your records, all of your computers' information is gone. How are you going to get your phones answered? How are you going to start notifying clients of the probable impact to their business? In this example, that we've talked about, the company should have immediately put something on the homepage of their website acknowledging the issue. And had they done that, then they could point to the blog and that would have worked okay. Or to the Facebook group. That would have been all right if they had told us as customers where we could look for information. Doing that wouldn't have resolved the issue about voicemail and emails not being responded to. In fact, for the first early part of the issue, there was nothing even on their voicemail to indicate that there was a problem. Somewhere during the process, they changed the voicemail to say, hey, we have a problem, and we're working on it. But that was where it stayed until the problem was resolved. And again, if you're a customer and you're trying to get information, that is not very helpful information. You have a problem, you're working on it. That's not what I care about as a customer. What I care about as a customer is when can I expect some relief? In whether we're talking about the website and information, or we're talking about the phone system or email response, those all put the responsibility on me as a customer to try to get information. And that's still not acceptable. It shouldn't be up to me to try to find information. It should be up to the vendor, the business, to try to be proactive and share information about where things are. The one thing that they could have done very easily is they could have done an email broadcast to all of their customers announcing that they had a problem, and then they could have kept updating that email as they started to make progress so that you would know where you were in the status. They should also have put a voicemail message that was updated regularly so that customers, if they did call, would know what the status was and when we could think it would be better. In both of those methods, though, they also should have addressed the customer's challenge. We're without internet. What is their suggestion? What could we do? How can they help us get back where we're online and we can conduct our business? So as you're working on your disaster plan, what I would suggest is that you think about what are the questions that your customers are going to have. Put yourself in their position. If you're the customer, what are the questions that you're going to have? So think about the questions that your customers will have and how you can start to get them answers. And you want to try to do so immediately and via multiple different channels. Again, you don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive in notifying your customers. Going back to the example of this company, one of the things that they should have done was they should have immediately started staffing up and getting people to answer the phones. This was a holiday and a holiday weekend. But that shouldn't have mattered. If something's happened and your business is no longer able to take care of the customers that are depending on you, you need to put a plan in place to start staffing up, answering the phone, and responding to emails so that your customers know that there's a problem. They could have leveraged technology as well. They could have put in place some kind of system that would generate a ticket. And there are lots of software applications that do that so that you can log like a service call. And then the system could automatically update people after they got their call placed so that they knew where they were in the queue and they knew that the company was aware of their problem. Because my first attempts to call, I was trying to let them know, hey, I didn't have any service. I had no idea at that stage that, everybody was out. Using the data collected in a system like that, they could also start to build notifications in for their customers, letting them know, keeping them updated. Now, if that company didn't have the technology or the staff to do that, there's companies like Fiverr that have contractors around the world that can be reached, that they could have reached out to try to get that implemented, so that within a day or so, their customers were starting to get some feedback. And I'll say, when you're thinking about your disaster plan, the real bottom line is you have to have some kind of a plan in place to start communication with your customers, so they're not sitting there in the dark wondering what's going on. When you're notifying your clients, you need to let them know what the probable impact is going to be. If your building burned to the ground and your customer needs toner, you need to be able to say, hey, it's going to be a while, or whatever the situation is. In your communication with your customer, as you're building out your disaster plan, the most important thing that you want to communicate is what the impact is going to be on them. I mean, they may be somewhat interested in the impact on you, but what they care about more than anything else is what's the impact on themselves. How is your problem going to affect them? And what I would encourage is to give them the worst case scenario. And you're like, well, why would I want to give them the worst case? Because I have a philosophy, and it holds true in every case that I've ever tested it, is you want to underpromise and overdeliver. If you tell your customers it's going to be 3 days before you can get them back up and working, they may not be real happy about that, but they'll be okay. They'll be like, all right, it's 3 days. I know what to expect now. And then if you can get it done in 2 days, they're going to think you're a rock star. If you tell them 2 days and it takes 3 days, they're going to be so frustrated for that last 24 hours. So underpromise, overdeliver. Give them the worst case scenario and let them know that you're going to try to do better than that. But in the worst case, this is what you expect to have happen. In addition to this, one of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you can keep providing updates to your customer. If you can leverage technology to automate it, that's good. That's probably the best way to do it. But one way or the other, you have to keep updating your customers. Don't let them think they're forgotten. You let them know what you're doing and what they can expect. And think about it from this perspective. Think about the impact a disaster in your business would have on your customers. But think about it, if you were the customer, what is it that I, as a customer, need to know, and how can I get that information? The next step is to start trying to mitigate the impact on your customers. So what is it you can do to make your customer situation better? And again, it'll vary for every business, and it will vary depending on what's happened. But you want to start doing what you can, and you want to start communicating the efforts you're making to mitigate that, again, to your customers. And I'll share this as a thought process for you. And depending on what's happened, if you don't take care of your customers and don't keep them informed, pretty soon somebody else is going to be taking care of them. Again, every business will be different in how a disaster affects it, and every disaster will affect a business differently. So I can't tell you what to do to mitigate the impact on your customers. Just think about what it is that you provide them and how you can make sure they get what they need in spite of what's happened. I listed restoring service in the third in the steps to take. Because if you're communicating and you're mitigating the problem, then the restoration of service becomes a little bit less important. And I would still start on that immediately, trying to get service back up and running. But I think the most important two are the communication and mitigation, and then we'll work on restoration. I guess one of the pieces and one of the reasons I put this in third place is because typically if a major disaster's happened, getting everything restored is going to take a period of time. We can start the communication and the mitigation almost immediately. If our building burned to the ground, getting a new building built, all those things, that's going to take a while. We'll talk now about the threats that need to be addressed. And what I'll say is the threats you face will be different depending on where you live in the world. There are several things that will be common, and we'll talk about those. The first thing we'll talk about is weather and natural disasters. You may live in an area that's prone to tornadoes. You could be in an area that's prone to hurricanes. You could be in an earthquake area. All of these kinds of natural disasters can have far-reaching impacts on your business and on your customers. It's interesting that in most of these cases, not only will the disaster affect you, but it may affect your competitors as well. And here's an interesting thought. In the event of a disaster, the companies with the best disaster plans are the ones that are going to win in the long run. Because if you don't have a disaster plan to get back up and running and care for your customers and someone else does, the odds are good that you could start to lose customers. When we think about any of these natural disasters, the one thing that they can do is they can pretty much wipe out our entire business, our infrastructure, our products, everything that they might be exposed to. And so we need to try to plan in case that happens. Another risk that could be fairly significant is fire. And so you think about it, what would it be like if you drove up to your business tomorrow and the business had burned to the ground? Another potential disaster is disruption in your supply chain. We can think back several years, and they had a major earthquake in Japan, and it disrupted the supply chain for dealers in the copier industry significantly. There was also, in that same general time frame, a challenge with the port workers being on strike and ships not being unloaded. The effect of these things disrupted the supply chain, and it meant that dealers had trouble getting supplies and parts and equipment. So think about your business and your supply chain. Where do the things that you need to operate your business come from? And if something disrupts that supply chain, what would be your plan to deal with that? And then we'll talk about infrastructure, because there are things that can happen to infrastructure besides fire. And when I say infrastructure, we'll talk primarily about your technology. A good example is we think about we have to have software to run our businesses for most of us. We may need internet access. My infrastructure got disrupted there. We think about the hardware, the computers that we use. All of these things are part of the infrastructure, and they're all subject to having something happen. A couple of questions to think about is, how vulnerable are you to a failure of either? And what can you do to protect your infrastructure from failure? And associated with infrastructure is also data. So you should think about yourself in this way as well, is how well protected is your data? How secure is it? What is the risk of cyber attack? What about ransomware? All of those things are potential impacts and could be disastrous if something happens. So you want to think about it and figure out what I could do to mitigate the damage if something does happen and what I could do to protect myself. The next three areas I'm going to talk about are things that you might not consider as disasters, but the impact could be very disastrous. So we'll start with accident. What is the plan in the event that somebody driving one of your vehicles is in a serious accident and kills someone? You're like, well, that probably wouldn't happen. And it might not happen. But if it does happen, you better have a plan. What if one of your employees is involved in some kind of work-related accident? Maybe they're in an accident where somebody else is at fault, but they die. Or they're working on a piece of equipment and get seriously injured or die. Again, you need to have a plan in place to know what the steps are that you need to take. You don't want to have to be trying to fumble through all your information, trying to figure out, well, now what do I need to do? That's not a good place to be. So you want to think about these kinds of things and structure a plan so that if they do happen, you know the steps you need to take. Here's another challenge. What if an employee sexually harasses a client or attacks a client? Now, again, maybe not probable, but possible. You want to have a plan. You want to think about these kinds of things. What about someone that steals from you in a significant way? Or maybe even worse, they steal from a customer. Again, with all of these things, we want to try to have something in place so that we know what to do. The unexpected ones are the hardest to plan for. And it's just because we don't know what to expect. But it's interesting. We think about the pandemic that we're dealing with. We can think about 9/11. What I can say is that businesses that had a disaster plan in place and had gone through the disaster planning process were better equipped than businesses that hadn't. Because you can look at your existing plan and start to pick out the pieces of it that would work. What could I do? And you can start to look through your existing plans, and while they may not cover every detail, they'll at least be helpful in figuring out what to do. And so now let's go through and we'll talk about some of the things that we want to consider. You think about your business trying to keep the doors open. There's a lot of pieces that go into that puzzle. And so we're going to look again, and we're going to think about it from the perspective we've had a catastrophic incident, and we're going to start working through the things we need to get in place. We could think of this kind of as a task list of things to be done. And not everything will need to be done in every instance. But you want to think about what you might need and have your task list ready for it. So we'll start with infrastructure. Because for most businesses today, infrastructure is a key part of their business. In fact, most of us, when our infrastructure is down, we're out of business. Think about your company without phone and internet. There's probably not going to be a lot you can get accomplished if you don't have some way to communicate. And I'm going to put communication at the very top of the list. I think it needs to be the number one priority. If something's happened to your communication, you need to get it restored as quickly as possible. To start with, your employees need to communicate with you, and you need to communicate with your employees. Your customers need to be able to reach you and talk to a live person if possible. They're not going to want voicemail, especially a voicemail that doesn't have any useful information on it. So my first question is do you know right now how to get your company phone transferred to cell phones? That's something to think about. And my next question associated with that is do your managers have a written procedure so they know how to do it if you're not available? If you have to resort on voicemail, it should be a priority to make sure that voicemail gets updated on a regular basis so that customers calling you get the most accurate information about what the situation is. Along with that, I would encourage you to make sure that you had a method, like a secondary method for customers to get in contact with you. So that if your phone system is out, is there somewhere else they can go that they know here's where else they can find information. Now, maybe it is your website. Maybe it is a social media group, but if that is the case, you need to make sure that on the voicemail it directs them there and that your customers should know that ahead of time. What about with your employees? Do you have a backup method for your employees to contact you? I'll give you some suggestions. Typically we would start with the phone, then email, maybe text, and then a social media channel that you could monitor where they could correspond to let you know if they're okay and what the situation is. Again, because if this is a widespread disaster, some of your normal lines of communication will be out, and so you want to try to find, again, we could say plans B through F or something, so that they know how to get in contact with you. So we've talked about infrastructure. What about your physical location? If the disaster has wiped out your physical location, your employees, now that they have infrastructure in place, need to start to have a place to work. What is your plan B? What is your plan C? Now, it may be that you say, okay, we'll work from home. Again, do the employees know that, and they know what the procedures are? Could be that maybe there's a facility that you can rent, like a hotel conference room or something, where you could start to set up a makeshift office. Again, you should have a plan, and you should have a backup to that plan, so that you have a couple of options available depending on what's happened. The really important piece of it is that you have a plan and that your customers know what the plan is. I put IT third on the list. And so you think about, now that you have worked out communications for your employees, you've verified their health and welfare, and you have a place to work, the next thing they're going to need is access to the data they use in their daily business. And if your location is wiped out and you had a physical server, how are you going to get the data back up and running? And it's important to think about it from the aspect of understanding what kind of equipment is in the server. Do you have an equipment list of what you would need to buy to restore your backup to your server? And you need to make sure that you have that. And it can't be on-site stored in the server, because if you can't get to the server, you can't get to your list. So these are all things that need to be in notebooks that senior management has where they can access them. If your system is cloud-based, then the damage to the physical location probably hasn't done you much harm on the data side. But does your working location you're going to put people have the bandwidth to support your operations? Again, these are questions you need to get answered ahead of time. Also, no matter whether you have a cloud-based server or a physical server, again, you want to make sure that you have the protections in place so nobody can lock you out of your own data. I mentioned this a little bit in the communication side, but you want to make sure that your employees are safe and in a safe place. Once you know that and you have communications established, you can start to work on notifying your customers. And it may be that you're in a position where it's going to take extra staff. We'll go back to the example, the story I was telling. They needed to get extra staff. They needed to get extra staff on a holiday and a holiday weekend. And they didn't. Now, my first thing is I would have called friends and family and said, hey, I know it's a holiday, but we've got a problem. I need your help. Let's get started. But that may not always be an easy option. So the other thing that you can do is to build a relationship with a company that provides temps, and make sure you have a relationship so that if you needed to, if it's we go back to a holiday weekend, that you can make a phone call and start to get people to answer phones and respond to emails. They don't have to know really anything about your business. They just need to be able to answer the phone and relay the data that you want them to relay to the customer, or to start sending out emails to your customers. Another piece of your disaster plan would be insurance. And I would highly encourage that you make sure the insurance you have covers not only the physical damage that you may run into and any liability issues that you may have, but that it also covers rental of extra space, hiring the help, all of the things that you might need to try to get yourself up and running as quickly as possible. I'm going to encourage you to test your plans. One common occurrence with disaster plans is they look really good on paper, but nobody's ever tried to implement it. And I can speak from experience. And I was really, when I had our business, we were really good about backing up the data, and we took the data home with us. And everything seemed to be fine. As far as we knew, everything was in good shape. Till I had to restore from one of the backups I'd taken home. And when we put it in and started the restoration process, it crashed in the middle of it and said that the file wasn't good. Now, I had done everything I thought right, but I had never tested to make sure that the backups it was creating would restore. And so I'm going to encourage you, as you think about your disaster plan, to figure out how to test it. I would encourage you to test every part of it that you could. Restore your backup. Switch to the backup. Move your phones from your business to cell phones or whatever your backup communication plan is. Test your communication plan for the employees so that in case of there's an emergency, that you can reach them and they can reach you. So test that. So here's a fun plan. When your first go to your business early in the morning, and when the first manager arrives, tell them that the building has burned to the ground and ask them what their plan is. And see if they have what they need to get started restoring things. You don't actually have to go through the motions, but make sure that they know what to do and the right order to do those things. Hopefully you're not ever going to need your disaster plan. But if you ever need it, you're really going to be glad you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it and found it helpful, do me some favors, please. First thing, hit the like button. That way YouTube knows to share it with others. Hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when I put up a new video. And also do me a favor, put a comment down below letting me know what you found useful. And also, if you have suggestions for other videos you'd like, put them in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. We'll see you next time.